All right, Doug Humphrey
So,
with Common Founder Mistakes, Volume 1.
yay. So thank you, Alla. So common founder mistakes. This is a very interesting subject, and I mean, it's of course it's deep. It goes on forever. There are like 7 zillion mistakes you can make. I mean, you're really in a situation here where you're talking about people who, in many cases, have never done this before. In terms of starting a company, they may have expertise in their area. They may be neuroscientists. They could be the maker of cool toys. They could be anything, and they decide that they're going to take that and transition that into starting a company to take advantage of it and make it available. But it's interesting because here you got people who want to do this very audacious thing, this very ambitious thing, and they're new at it. They have very little experience with it. There aren't a lot of classes. They don't have, there's no such thing as the degree in starting the companies. So it's a very brave act in many ways. Um, and so it is kind of fun to delve into this stuff. I want to point out that if anybody has any particular things that they're concerned with, now I'm going to run through some real quick. But feel free to type it in and tell Allah, and we'll address it because presentations are good, but getting to the actual questions that the real people have is better. So let's start. Okay, hold on a second. There we go. Oops. So mistake number one. You hear this a lot. Let's get this company going first, and we can discuss how to divide equity later. Well, generally speaking, that's a mistake. Now, like almost all of the things you're going to see in here, mistake is a relative term. You don't really want to say we must decide all equity issues right now before we even discuss the idea at all. That's way too early to get into that. But once three or four or five people or two people or whatever, kind of, I mean, if you're just one person, then you really aren't having to divide the equity. You own the whole thing. And we'll put a little star here saying it works a little differently in academia, maybe, but we can talk about that specifically. But, you need to get to the equity question earlier rather than later, because it's much easier to have a very rational discussion about equity when it isn't glaringly valuable, when it's all potential and you're saying, well, it might be worth some money down the road, but we're not totally sure, as opposed to a valuation event that all of a sudden now you're talking about real money. People get very unreasonable sometimes, irrational even when they talk about real money. So you tend to do it earlier rather than later. And whenever people are like, we don't have to deal with that now, we can put that off. Well, more often than not, they're wrong. More often than not, they could be saying that because it puts them in a better position, more advantageous to get a bigger chunk or something. But they also, in many cases, are just like, why do we have to deal with that? Because it's a contentious issue. It pits friends against friends, partners against partners, but it does that much worse later on. So if you get it taken care of early, it's good. Let's see. Mistake number two: we'll divide everything equally. Four guys get together, four girls get together, four people get together, and they divvy it all up 25 each, right? 25% each. What's wrong with that? Well, first of all, you're probably early on in this thing, so you don't really know that each of them is going to contribute 25% of the effort and 25% of the value in the work, right? So to say that it's fair to everyone, that equal distribution matches some sort of societal image of fairness, but may actually not at all um, be fair. And in fact, it may very well be very unfair. In fact, if you in the beginning divvy it all up evenly, the odds that it's actually going to turn out that that is the right divvy up to match real fairness and what's going on are infinitesimally small. And what it is going to do is it's going to disincent people. So let's say you have a guy or a girl or whatever, who is going to go and just kill themselves to make this thing happen. And it dawns on them at some point that the person over there across the way, who has also got 25%, just like they do, isn't working very hard. Well, you know, human nature, if you want to talk fairness, human nature may very well be that the super overdrive person, if they're not seeing kind of a super overdrive chunk of the gig, may start going, I'm going to work about maybe like as hard as that guy is working. Or it may actually, I don't think that'll be like that, but it might be a little bit of disincentive there. So mistake number two, will divvy this is not as fair as it sounds. Number three, the VC just want to steal my idea. I love your graphic in this. This is really pretty good. I think I know that guy. No, but seriously, um, you know, a certain amount of paranoia may be healthy. I'm certainly not someone who would ever preach against paranoia. A little paranoia kind of helps. But you cannot have the bunker mentality and start a company. I know that that sounds bad or crazy. I don't know. It doesn't work. You can't do it. And for every instance that somebody might be able to point out that anyone's ever pulled that off, and I can't think of any, in reality, there are a million people who've like tried to, I can't tell you my thing, I can't do anything, and they freeze themselves in place when speed to market, speed of development. I mean, why do you think everything in the minimum viable product MVP got put out? Because people were taking too long to build product. You really want to get your stuff out there. You really want to get going. Ideas don't age like fine wine. Generally speaking, you know, ideas get done by someone. If you're not the one doing them, someone else will figure it out and someone else will go do it. Um, so the VC want to steal my money. No, you do have to, you have to consider each investor separately. You need to look at, here's Joe, here's Jane, and here's a big VC firm. And you look at them and you say to Joe and Jane, they're individual investors, you do your due diligence. You have to say to these people, hey, listen, I understand that you're interested in investing. I'm flattered. I'm very happy to have your investment. Could I speak to the people who you've invested in before? You know, I'd like to speak to your CEOs, because unless they're your first investment, and that itself is a good data point and is going to tell you a lot, they should have a stable, a cadre of people who they've invested in the past, and they should have no problem saying, look, here are 5 different people I've invested in. Call them all if you want, pick any 3, whatever. I'll send letters of introduction and ask them how the experience was. And they don't all have to be uniformly, oh, she's like Santa Claus. She's great. She's fantastic. She's the best person in the world. Oh, this, that, and that. No, because she's an investor. And you're not necessarily looking for happiness, sweetness, joy, and light from an investor. You're looking for someone who puts their money where their mouth is, someone who does their own due diligence, someone who is useful, gives good introductions to people, or at a minimum gives some good advice. And sometimes you're only looking for money in people who don't meddle around. But the point is that you should be able to get a feel for this. They should be able to give you references so that you can do your due diligence on them, just like they are going to be doing their due diligence on you and your opportunity. They don't want to steal your idea. I mean, that's like saying I don't want to take a home loan from a bank because all the bank wants to do is come take my house. The bank doesn't want to take your house. If the bank wanted to take your house, they'd buy houses. They don't buy houses, they issue loans. They don't want to take your house. They only take your house if you don't make payments. Your VC doesn't want to steal your idea. They're investing in this company and they hope that you are the right person to drive this company and go make this thing a success and make money. Now that said, if you turn out not to be the right person to drive the company, You may not be the head of the company forever and ever and ever and ever. You do not have a right to it. You have an opportunity to it. Let's keep moving. Mistake 4, I can get them to give me money for my company without giving them any equity. No, that's called a loan. And no one loans money to startups like that. It just doesn't happen. The risk of getting repaid or the risk to getting repaid, the risk of not getting repaid is monumental with a startup. Startups don't repay, okay? That's just the way it works. Startups take in risk capital, very high risk capital. When the VC or the angel investor or whatever slides that stack of chips over to you, slides that money over, they know it's not coming back. There's no such thing. A piece of the company is coming, and someday, years down the road, this piece of paper, this, piece of the company may turn out to be worth a lot of money, and they surely hope so. That's why they're investing. But no, in return for the money, the lifeblood of a company, you have to give them equity. And by equity, we mean an ownership share. Mistake number 5, I should hire my friends to help. This is actually one of the most common ones. I actually have a whole talk that I should give to online company on how to fire your friends. Because everybody hires all their friends, and then it's like, oh, they're all my friends. I can't fire them all. They're screwing up though. And it's like, yeah, well, you're gonna have to have that day where you wander on through and go, Bob, I love you, baby, but you gotta go. Joan, thanks for helping out. I hope your next gig is good. So, you should not hire all your friends. Some of your friends may actually be people who you should hire. But when you're hiring people, and hiring people for startups really is an art, because they're usually not even coming in just to do one job. I mean, you're really lucky if you can bring them in and have them just be doing a sort of one-dimensional, two-dimensional sort of job thing. But if you're hiring 3 people and then you're the 4th person, if you can hire all 3 of them to be very linear in their jobs, that would mean that you are doing everything else. I mean, you are cleaning the bathrooms, and you are doing customer tours, and you are raising money, and you're writing UI code, and you're processing credit cards, and because a company consists of like 1,000 things that have to happen. And you always end up with that jack of all trades. I like to say I used to be like a 4 of all trades, but I was very willing, and I'm willing to do it all. So, the guy who's willing to clean the bathroom is a lot better than the people who aren't willing to clean the bathroom, but would be better at it, So you will probably end up hiring some people that but you shouldn't hire them because they are your friends. You should look at it and say, how fortunate I am that I already have a few friends who are good enough to do this job and good enough to build a company with. But not all of my friends are good enough to do this job and good enough to build a company with. So if you are fortuitous and a couple of your friends are the right people in the right place at the right time, they may very well be early hires. But not all of your friends should be, and you shouldn't be hiring these people because they're your friends. A little caveat in there, in the early startup days, one of the characteristics is willing to work for free. And sometimes your friends are much more willing to do that than not friends. However, don't assume that. One of my companies, I had people, show up and go, hi, I want to work for you. I understand what you're doing. And I've gone, That's great. I'm very glad you understand what I'm doing. I hear from the grapevine you're pretty good at what you do, but I have no money. And I'll give you a call when I think that I'll be able to like hire you. 2 days later, I walked into the office and that guy is sitting at the customer service desk fielding customer service calls. And I'm like, pretty sure I didn't harm. I know I can't pay him. But maybe we have an understanding. And he sat there for like months and just, handled customer support and was one of the best, was the best at it. And guess what? At some moment in time, our revenue was up and something else happened. And all of a sudden I realized when I say slack, free money, I still was holding down a day job and, but there was enough that I could turn to that guy and I could go, I don't have much, but I can offer you this right now. And he said, I'd love that. Thank you. And I started paying him, not a lot, but that's okay because it goes on your little whiteboard internally where you're like, yeah, this guy, when the time comes. And we had not divvied up stock. That's one of the reasons why we weren't quite there yet on figuring out the stock thing, because in reality, I didn't know who were going to be the early contributors, and this guy just literally walked in the door. I mean, I was able to make some phone calls and figure out who he was, but that guy just and I didn't know him, wasn't a friend of mine. um Eventually ended up like VP level, la la la, and he's a big guy in the industry now, which is great. But and he got his stock, la la la. But you're gonna how things are gonna roll out. Serendipity is a big part of startup everything, but particularly startup hiring, because you never know who you're going to run into. Also, you will make lots of mistakes and you will fire lots of people. And if you can't fire people or terminate or readjust or however you want to do that, well, don't worry, you'll learn. Number 6, I can get other people to do all the work and I'll keep ownership of the company. Right off the bat, this sounds good, doesn't it? Just, bring people in, do it all. So generally speaking, people need to be compensated for what they're doing. Now, people are sort of an elastic resource. It's like in physics, elastic collision, You can get them to do stuff for a while against their own interest. I mean, I don't want to put it that coldly, but, But eventually, they wake up and they're like, I think I'm being used here. And then they tend to react to that because they resent being used. And one of the arts of a startup is to get people to do things for you, but not feel like they are being used and abused. This borders into what we will discuss at some point called leadership. Leadership is asking a lot of people, but doing so in a way that you keep faith with them, doing so in a way that they know, they will believe that they will be taken care of, and that getting taken care of can't happen now, but they're going to give now, they're going to work now, but that down the road they have trust. And leadership is one, the front end of that, of getting them to do that, and then the back end of actually delivering to take care of them. And the back end is important because otherwise you're just a con man. And the whole front end, startup guy or grifter? Well, the follow through really kind of determines. Intent means a lot too, but the follow through means a lot. Are you taking care of people? When all of a sudden the money does show up, do you run off with it and go, mine, 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 I did all the work? Or do you look around and go, no, we're a team, we did work, and guess what? All these people who are on your team, you're going to compensate them and take care of them and make sure that they walk off feeling like they've been taken care of and like you have delivered on your bargain. You have, from a leadership position, you said we were going to do okay. we've done okay, and that's good. So can I get people to do all the work and I'll keep ownership of the company? So people will work without compensation for a little bit. But the reality is that at some moment in time, you either have to pay money or you pay stock. You know, there are only those two things. There's cash, and cash is good if you got it because they can use cash to buy food and they use cash to, pay the rent. Or there's stock where you say, I don't have cash, but I'll give you a piece of the company and then we're all working together. And at some moment in time, maybe you won't even be working for this anymore, but other people, because you own a piece of the company and the company is going, other people will be working for you because they'll be increasing the value of the company, increasing the value of your stock, and thus making money for you. So you either got to do one or the other. And the general rule for a startup is you're generally giving away equity because you don't have cash. If Joe Blow is going to write you a UI or Joe Blow is going to, you know, do some chunk of software or chunk of hardware, or you're going to bring in uh, this science expert who she knows her stuff and this is her field, and you have 1,000 questions and she can rattle them off, and it's going to take you a year to do this. It's going to take her a week to do this. You're like, that's who I need for this job. Well, but if you don't have any money, how are you going to pay this person? How are you going to make sure that she's compensated, that he's compensated, that they're compensated? So that's where stock ownership comes in. And the good news about equity, and people always focus on how much do they own or how much does somebody own. You give stock, and when I say give, you don't just gift it. I mean, it's you're give it you're exchanging stock for something, performance. Well, having stock in a company aligns interests. So if you have stock in my company, you're not going to obsess about it every day or something, but you're going to remember that you have stock in this company. And when some opportunity comes along in the wild, and you're on the PTA, and one of the other people on the PTA says, I'm looking for somebody to do this environmental work at work because I mean, it's really not what we do, but we're really up against it, and we got to find an environmental company. And you go, I have stock in Doug's environmental company. You're going to go, hey, call my buddy. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you about this. Interests are aligned. So it's not a bad thing that other people own stock, have equity shares in your company. Not necessarily a bad thing. It's generally, and it's really an inevitable thing. If you're in here and you don't have cash, then this is your money. This is how you pay. Mistake number 7. The moment I think about a cool idea, it's suddenly worth a lot of money. Oh yeah. So almost any of us can run in our head and go, I got this idea. And I think that this idea will take 20% of these markets and 10% of that market and maybe 50% of that market. And here's the size of those markets and 20% of that. This is $1 billion idea. Oh, woot. Well, yeah. But the problem is that maybe it is and maybe it isn't. But what do they say? Inspiration is 10%, perspiration is 90%. You have an idea. That's all you've got. And to be worth $1 billion, it would probably be, if you run the rest of those projections out, a company of 350 employees. And if you do some more calculation on where you're going to get the employees or where you're going to get the effort and where you're going to find the right people, probably offices in 3 cities, 350 employees scattered out throughout the world working virtually. Oh, and 2.5 million lines of code to be written and all these other things. Those things don't just grow on trees. They don't just magically appear. Those are 90% of that value. So, you do it all up and you say, we're here at the start. what we're going to do is, and it's going to be worth $1 billion. Well, if you back out all of those costs, all that expense, all that stuff, what's your idea really worth here? Well, I mean, you could say, well, I've seen the path, and I think that my idea plus $50 million in capital plus 3 years of wall clock time will be worth $1 billion. Well, but where are you going to get the 50 mil? Well, we go back to that equity thing, which is to say, no one's going to put 50 mil into your idea until you actually execute and do the work. So you can try to backfit this in and come up with what your thing is worth here. But then you have a big line down here called risk. Because this whole big projection assumes that it works. And that assumption, there's no 100% here. There's humongous risk down here. So if you actually tried to do all the numbers and discounting for risk and things like that, you know, then you have to stick another thing down here and say, having taken this risk, what is that worth? Because I need to make profit down here. You do this whole thing up, you'll realize that you might have an idea that may someday produce a company that will be able to be $1 billion value in all these markets and industries. But it's not worth $1 billion. Not right now, not as an idea sitting here in your head. And so there are people who get fixated on this. And I like to try to point out that what I just said, that mathematically it's a fallacy. It's not just look, kid, you're dreaming, which you are, by the way, but it's really also, even to the analytical person, you could try to map this out and model this. And what you will start to find is that when you load all of the hidden factors, cost is a hidden factor, risk is a hidden factor, you have to put other people's profit onto these things, you start to realize that, it's a real crapshoot the first time someone puts a little money into you there. And that your idea with no motion, putting it forward, putting it into motion to make starting it down this timeline is worthless. And nobody likes to hear that. But if you think it has worth and you don't want to do these things, well, then what you do is you do the intellectual property route. You say, I'm going to develop the idea as an idea for an idea's sake, and then we're going to go try to license it. We're going to say to people, we have this little core thing right here, and if you put it into this framework, then look, $1 billion company, etc. Well, the problem with that is that's notoriously unsuccessful. It happens that it has success, but it also is a very difficult path. So, in a marketplace driven by ideas and driven by capitalism, driven by things, your idea is only worth what someone will pay for it. And in the very, very beginning, no one will pay for it. And that's what makes venture capitalists, angel investors. This is the rarest of the rare breed. These are the people who actually have some money and are willing to actually risk some of it at this very, 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 very beginning. Now, one of the things that is important is sweat equity. Where else are you going to find an opportunity? Let's say I find a couple of young kids who, write code and, they can bash some stuff together for me, and they might not be doing the code that I want to run the instruments in my airplane that I'm flying, someplace in, but it's good enough for an early model of this thing or this application or whatever it is that I want to do. With them, there you are. Maybe they can go make $10 or $20 or $50 an hour, whatever it is. But they can come do a little bit of work for you, get some equity in something, and actually maybe have it turn into much bigger dollars than that because they're in early. So there's opportunity here too. I don't want to crush it. I don't want to tell you there's no opportunity, but you have to make it. You can't just come up with the idea and go, ding, it's worth this. No one will buy it probably. Now, if they see you busting your butt and they see you and a few other people, they see you exercising leadership, bringing a team together, executing on trying to move this idea forward, trying to, and not trying to, but making something of it and making something better of it and better of it. Now they see you wielding the tools that are necessary to go build something that's worth something, and they'll invest in that. But they are investing in the jockey just as much as in the horse. The idea is just the horse. The jockey is you. And nobody bets on horses with no jockeys. And they know that the jockey is the thing that's going to make it work. Otherwise, the horse may not even get to the finish line. Number 8, why would I give away any ownership? My idea, my invention, my research. Like the mine. Going back to what I just said, equity aligns interests. Equity is a way to pay people to do things for you that you need done that, you have no money to pay. If you go to Microsoft right now, they're going to pay you to do a job. And sure, there'll be some stock options in there or something, but they're not paying you with stock. You're going to make your 150 or 200 or 80 or 90 or whatever thousand a year. And, you get some stock options, and in a good year, your stock options may get you some vacation money or, whatever it is. It's all nice. Don't get me wrong. I used to work for a big company like that. What I would do is I'd do a startup, and then after a while, those would fail, and then I'd go to work for a real company that had benefits for a while, and then work for them for a few years, and then to try another startup, and then, and that way you at least had healthcare coverage like half the time or something. So, why do you give away? Well, you don't give away. You use it as a currency to pay to get things done. And it aligns interests. And it does have the sparkly promise that this might be worth a lot of money someday. And, as a leader, con man, leader, leader is con man for good. Con men are con men for bad. It is the currency that you use. So those are just some really basic ones. I'm interested in hearing from you guys. What are the questions that you have? What are the things that you're up against, or where you've heard this or you've heard that we can help put to bed a little bit, or at least help explain and expand and open up. Thanks. Hello. Hey, Ala. I like how they have.
Hi. So thank you for that, Doug.
Oh, sure.
If anybody has any questions, I would like to throw other things to see if Doug thinks that's a mistake or not. Please submit them now. One of the attendees, Piotr, says great talk, should be required to watch for any of our PIs.
Well, that's nice.
Thank you.
I do think that there's a lot of just basic, one of the things that University of Maryland or any organization that is trying to support this stuff can do is at least try to get some of this basic stuff off of people's plates a little bit. There's so much misinformation. Well, in this case, I don't want to really call it misinformation. I don't think anybody's out there spreading stuff to deliberately mislead, but people get attached to their beliefs about stuff, and they go, well, I've heard this, and whether they've heard it and it's right, or maybe they were talking to some disgruntled guy, or it's always good to have some way to fact check this stuff a little bit, or in this case, just get different opinions on it. So I think these kind of talks are very useful.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you talk about a mistake that you didn't cover here, but you personally made that you could share with us, and how you handled it?
Sure. Hmm.
I'm sure you've had a few.
There are so many. you know, when you started this many companies, I will say the mistakes sort of blur. Um, there was okay, so there have been moments, when let's talk more when the company has been successful. Something that is always difficult is when you actually have to change your role in the company, and it's in your interest to do so. There's something in you that is, ego driven, that is like, I can do this, but no one is the best at everything. And in fact, entrepreneurs, tend to be, like I said, the jack of all trades a little bit because it's required, but they tend to have like their strong points. But we were coming up on IPOing a company, right? And I was okay intellectually with saying, listen, I don't want to be the public company CEO. I don't want to have to do earnings calls on CNBC. I don't have to do this stuff. It's not me. It's not, you know, I liked the company when it had 150 people and I knew all of them by name. And all of a sudden now we had like, 400, 500 people. We're all over the place and we're going public. Well, it's a nice problem to have. Oh my God, we should all, the day we go public is the day all my shares are worth a lot of money. But at the same time, oh, and by the way, for that company, when we got, when we finally went public, my shares, which at one moment in time had been 100% of the company, but then I had done a 60-40 share with my partner in starting the company. I had 60, he had 40. My 60% of the company had been diluted down to 13%. Okay. You might go, wow, that's not very much. It's like, yeah, but the company went public for hundreds of millions of dollars. So suddenly 13% of that looks really good. So the pie got much bigger. And, even as your slice gets smaller. But, my mistake was really for a while there resisting the knowledge that in order to do this, we really needed another CEO. We needed someone else because it's just not in me to be a public company CEO. It requires a lot of things that I didn't feel like I could or that I wanted to change myself around for. So that's one. It's always hard when you hire someone. So when you hire someone, for me anyway, and this is different for different people, but for me, hiring someone was really investing in them. It was really, I'm not going to say I'm hiring them to prove something because that's not quite it, but it's hiring, you're vested that you're hoping that this is a good choice. And so you are a little resistant when you start to have people come to you in the organization go, you really got to get rid of this person. They're not what you think, they're not as good as what you think. They're not as, pure in motive maybe as what you think, and various things like that. That's always difficult. That's where I got to the doctrine of the baseball caps, where you actually say, so you start a company. That means you have a baseball cap called founder. And once in a while, you need to go away from everything else, put on the founder baseball cap, and only think about the company as the founder. Founder is about leadership, and founder is about really, literally owing. When I got a company to come work for us for almost nothing to do work, I have to keep faith with that and remember that and not throw them under the bus. But then you have a cap called CEO, which is the current person running the company. And maybe you need to find a new vendor to do this work because they're not doing it anymore. Whereas the founder baseball cap, the founder is feeling very loyal to them. But the CEO is saying, yeah, but they're fucking up. They're making mistakes. And they gotta go. And then you have another baseball cap called shareholder. Because guess what? Once in a while you need to think about this in terms of, I am a big shareholder in this company. What are my interests here? And you know what? It was the shareholder cap when I put it on. It's a virtual cap, but when I put it on, that basically allowed me to see that I needed to get rid of myself as CEO because I was standing in the way of my own interest. And I needed to bring in someone else to get this company IPO'd. Because if I didn't do that, with me at the helm, I don't think we were going to get the IPO because it was beyond my skill sets and really my desire. And, so there you go, right? So at some moment in time, the baseball cap's focusing on just certain aspects of things helps. Let's see, other mistakes. Well,
Well, can I interrupt
no,
you
go
for a
ahead.
minute?
No, go. Of course, of course.
So we have actually have a question from Brian Toll, and we can go back to more of your mistakes. But
My mistakes
everybody,
are legend, so don't worry.
everybody who's still on the call, please feel free to submit additional questions. But we have a question from Brian Toll.
Yeah.
What do you think of dynamic equity models, such as slicing pie, where companies track uncompensated time, and when in Series A happens, they convert to real equity based on value at the time?
It's conceivable that these things could work. It's you need software, you need stuff to manage this. I actually, I think all of us have had that idea. I had that idea 30 years ago and doing a flexible structure. And a lot of that had to do with before there was gig economy, but we certainly had consultants and, you had guys who would, software was kind of like almost the original gig thing because there were always guys you knew who could write a fast chunk of code for you and did not want to work for you, did not want to work for your company, and we're kind of like cash on the barrelhead guys, but you'd go to them once in a while and you go, hey, I don't have cash, but I really need this code. Can you do this week for me? I'll slide you some shares. I'll give you some stock. And, some of them are like, nope. My religion is cash only. Fine. And others are like, I don't usually do it, but, we've known each other for 10 years. So, yeah, I'll do some code for you, kick me some options. So, if you have something to manage this, then it might actually be a good idea and it might work. Now, the thing is, though, that it's a lot of work to manage it. Keep in mind that most companies can't even get around to giving you a yearly review, performance review. On almost all startups, you hear blah, blah, blah about, well, we hire you and we have, 90-day probation and blah, 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 oh, we're going to do a 6-month or blah, 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 blah. Nobody has any time for that. Nobody has time to review. The entire job is putting out fires 24/7, 365. So, unless the overhead of actually doing it can be handled, it will turn out to be more trouble than it's worth. And it also has the potential to cause real trouble. Because if you don't handle it, this is a part of people's compensation. So if you don't actually, go through the effort to figure it out, then it's going to blow up in your face, and it might blow up in your face pretty severely as people are like, I'm not writing any more code for you. I'm not doing this work for you. You have not gone through, what did I get? I haven't gotten anything for this, etc. So, in principle, it sounds very interesting. I think in practice, it may keep the focus on compensation a little too much. One of the things you sort of want to do is you're walking a fine line. Okay, if you're an entrepreneur, and I mean this in the best way. One of my VC guys said this to me at once. He said, "What I like about you is you are always selling. You're selling to your employees, you're selling to your customers, you're selling to your investors, you're always selling." Now that sounds slimy, but that's because his definition of selling is a different thing than yours or mine might be. Selling is a good thing in his world. What that means is you're always presenting and you're always informing, not that you're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, but that you are always trying to communicate the values of the company, the value of the company and of the products, etc. And so you want to have a little bit of attention to the compensation model because that is something that drives people. But you don't want your employees to have the maniacal focus on the compensation model because that's actually really terrible. That's a horrible mode for an employee to be in, or a consultant or anyone else. You want them to work because they want to do it and because it's a righteous thing to do. You want them to work because they believe in what they're doing. And when their minds do go to compensation, you want them to have that satisfaction feeling that the compensation is fair and just and mostly tracking with what they're doing. So dynamic stuff might be good. I think the devil is very much in the implementation and the details. Over.
We don't have any more submitted questions, so maybe we can go back to, but we still have about 10 minutes or so on the hour. You want to talk about more of your mistakes?
Sure. So many. Well, and it's kind of funny because your mind sort of gets rid of a lot of these. Corporate culture. Okay, let's if we're talking about the big touchstone things, and the big touchstone things from an entrepreneur. I'm talking about, I'm not teaching code writing or whatever here. This is, you're the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is the catalyst that causes everything to happen. All the pieces are already there. The entrepreneur very seldom walks into a situation and has to build from scratch everything. Almost always the pieces are there, and you are the catalyst. You maybe have a piece. I mean, others may have tried it before, but they didn't have the key thing, and you do, but you still need to have those skills. So leadership is a big thing, but corporate culture, and I say that, you may not even be a corporate yet, culture is a huge issue for these things. When you start building a company, you build out of what you find. So we've come to a clearing in the forest, and I and you and another person are here, and we decided we're going to build a fort. This is a place to build a fort. And I don't mean a kid fort. I mean, a fort. There's wood here, there are rocks, there's stuff. Well, the first thing we don't do as a startup is say we need to order linoleum, right? We don't have linoleum. It does not grow here. We have rocks and we got a stream over there, we got mud, we got trees. We're going to cut some trees down, we're going to build a fort. So as a startup, you work with what you got, and your culture as a startup is almost always a little bit of us against them. If you're in the computing industry, you would see IBM and the big guys, and you'd be like, we're going to build a better machine than them. And maybe you're here, maybe there are other forts around, but you're like, we're going to build a better fort because we're smarter and because forts are what we do. So you build with what you've got. Your culture, corporate culture, defines not what you can do, but it kind of defines what you will do. Um, and so it becomes an important thing. Now, why do I say, all this? So mistakes. You can make mistakes in building your corporate culture. So your corporate culture doesn't have to be exactly what you are, but it can't be too far away from, you can't, if you stretch it too much, it feels artificial. Your corporate culture has to be a little organic. It has to be what you are, who you guys are. Here we're doing this work. Well, we're a little nitty gritty. I mean, here we're building these things. You got to be a little bit us against them. You got to drive. There's got to be a reason why people get up in the morning. Pay is not the reason why people get up in the morning. You know, people get up in the morning. I mean, it's nice to be able to pay your rent, but people get up in the morning because they want to go do something and they want to go build something and they want to go be part of something. So, corporate culture being important, once in a while, you will find this person that if you hire this person, you'll realize that they are poison to your corporate culture. This does happen. As an entrepreneur, I assure you, you will make this mistake. Sometimes these people are tremendously narcissistic, but it's never one thing. Because if it was one thing, you would have known not to hire them. Oh, and this dovetails to a very specific thing. There's actually a book written about this called the no asshole rule. You never hire an asshole to be in your company. Now, the problem with this is, especially in the startup world, sometimes you got to hire that guy. A guy in this case, a non-gender term, but it's almost always a guy. Sometimes you have to hire that guy because that guy is the only guy who knows how to write that code or do that thing or make that laser work, lasers, or whatever it is. So that's difficult. What that means, though, is that in accepting this management challenge, that I'm going to hire this guy, I'm then going to have to wrap a cocoon around them. And I'm going to have to play interference guy between him and the rest of my organization a little bit. Because what I can't do is go, well, I know that Joe is a nasty guy, but he's doing all this stuff for us. But I'm gonna hire him anyway. Oh, and now I'm gonna turn him loose in my organization. You can't do that. Once if you've decided that you have to have this guy, then there's additional overhead. You put it on your personal list to go, okay, I'm gonna have to manage him, and at some moment in time, you'll end up firing him. It's just gonna happen because assholes don't scale into corporate culture well. They can hurt it, and later on, they won't get diluted, they'll destroy it. So what you end up having to do is you end up having to go, now let's look at the law of hats here, right? Yep, go ahead.
I have a question. Well,
Yep.
people don't walk into your office with, asshole written on their forehead. How do you know that they are one?
One, of course, so let's go back to that compensation model thing, right? The deadly flaw in that, if it has one, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying that it has a deadly flaw, but everything has an Achilles heel. The Achilles heel on that one is probably simply that managing it takes up too much time, and the management of it will go by the wayside because it's not critical path. Like getting the product out is critical path. Doing due diligence is also something that doesn't feel like it's critical path. Bob's willing to do the job. Bob is sitting in front of me. We can do this thing. I talked to Joe. Bob says Bob is fine. I should hire Bob. Time out. That is how it probably goes. I mean, what I just said there is 80% of the time, probably what happens. And in that case, you don't find out that he's an asshole until, he's been here for 3 months and you're having riots down in code development, and you have some manager who's like pissed off at this guy, and all this shit's going on, and everybody's coming to you and they're going, oh, this is terrible, and at that moment, you know. So the easiest thing to say is you need to do some due diligence, no matter what and who and how good they look. If they're not known to you particularly, you are going to have to make some phone calls, send some emails, find out some stuff about this guy, this girl, whoever it is, and go, hey, how is working with them? And you have to listen. I saw the hand, so I'll just finish with this. People are going to speak code speak back to you, very rarely. And I once got one of these. It was great. I called and I said, hey, I'm looking at maybe using this guy to do some work. What do you think of him? And this guy just tore him up 20 minutes, 10 minutes, I don't know, 3 minutes. Felt like a year. On the phone, boom. And all I could go was I laughed. I said, look, thank you. Thank you very much. He's like, no problem. Click. And I did not hire him because it echoed with some other things I'd heard, right? But normally they're going to give you non-committal speak because people have this idea that maybe they get sued or whatever. Oh, John was, he was efficient, and you ask some questions and they're going to talk around the answer. But go ahead. I see there's a hand. Go ahead.
So we have a raised hand, Brian. I am trying to unmute you. Maybe Brian, can you unmute yourself? So when I click on unmuting you. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It was a typo.
We could talk about typos.
No. Yeah. But this was really informative. I appreciate your answer on the dynamic equity. It's the topic I'm exploring, and I agree with you, though.
I would not a joke. A while back, I had a business plan. Okay, that's being overly flattering. I had drawn up something like that, where you would have a system where you would automate, you'd task out pieces of code. We were writing a lot of code back then. You'd task out code and you'd actually allow people to bid a little bit on code, and you have a couple of slider bars. You'd say, this code is worth this amount to us. We're able to offer this much cash and this much into your option package. And you can move the slider bars around a little bit so that on a given day, a developer might say, I don't really need the cash. I love this company. I want the stock. They can move the slider down to 0 and then maximize how much stock we would put toward their program for doing this work, right? Or they'd be like, I'm going to have to pay rent. I'd love some stock, or like I had a couple of people, I've only run into this twice at almost a religious level, who are like, I don't do stock options. I never do stock options. Cash only, nothing else. And and I needed these guys to do some stuff. And I literally had to go to the board and say, listen, I want these guys to do this stuff, but they are vociferously anti-stock, and so, or anti-options. And so I just want you guys to know I need to move a little money from this budget over to code development, because I can't get the usual deal that I can get with the developers to do this work. I'm really going to have to like pony cash to these guys. And my board was like, oh well, okay, if that's the right thing to do, go for it. They weren't micromanaging me or anything. And I mean, technically, I think I could have done it without the board, but that's another thing that we can talk about at some point, is how you deal with boards of directors. Sometimes you have an opportunity to surface something to the board where you're pretty sure you know what the answer will be. So you're not taking a lot of risk, but you're actually educating your board, you're surfacing this up. And I literally had board, and these are board members of, a couple of really, huge VC firms were on the board and stuff, and we talked about it for 20 minutes. They were like, really? We haven't heard about that, And I was able to say, oh yeah, there are some people out there who are like this and like that. And the board was like, oh no, it was very informative. And so you've actually in that moment, you've done a good thing for everybody, because these guys are on other boards of directors, right? They're not just on my board; they're on boards for other firms that they've invested in, and so you don't just you don't hide shit from the board much, and sometimes you want to surface something up to them to, because everybody should know that you're dealing with this, right? But yeah, I mean, I'm myself, I'm enamored of the idea, I kind of like it. But the problem with it is my reality detector, says that a lot of people, when I run startups, there are moments when I have to remind people to eat. That's pretty fundamental. And if I have to remind them to go do a review, or I mean, like I said, nobody ever gets their reviews done. I mean, it's horrifying. So, but it's a thing to think about. I mean, if it could be automated or made lower friction a little, but of course, part of the whole idea is that you want it to be friction, because if there's no friction to it, then there's, in a way, if there's no friction to it, there's no value to it, because it's not showing the participant how they're benefiting.
Right. That's right.
Yes, all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we are at time. If you would like to continue conversation with Doug, there's a URL where you can sign up to meet with him. And yep. Doug is doing regular sessions for us. Doug, just wanted to let you know that Laura Newman was also on this webinar, and she left a note saying thanks for sharing your experience. My 16-year-old son was listening, so that's from Laura.
Awesome. I just want to say Laura is awesome.
Yep. And so we are at time. Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you to everybody who signed in to listen, and to those who stuck in overtime. Like I mentioned, Doug is available for weekly meetings, and you can sign up with him to talk to him one-on-one at that URL. So yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian, for asking questions.
If you're good, you can even talk to Bento.
Hi, Bento.
Hi, Bento. This is the Bento buddy. He's our little dog. So, well, he's one of 5 dogs. So, but he's the youngest of them. And we're in these are what we call pandemic pups. So we're in puppy land here in Zoom. So keeping us sane. This is he mentors me. Bye, guys.
All right, bye. Thank you.
No troubles.